What's up, guys? It's Nalik. So today we're going to talk about using templates in Cubase. I'm going to walk you through kind of my template that I'm using currently. The reason I use a template is because you don't want to be wasting a lot of time opening the same plugins every time you start a project. For example, for your metering plugins or your grouping or your organizational stuff in your project. So I'm going to jump right into Cubase and I'll kind of walk you through my template and why I made the choices that I made and how it's organized to kind of give me a boost in how quickly I can get things started in the project, but also not lead me down the same creative path necessarily. It's really just a bare bones template of the plugins that I use for metering and my grouping. And yeah, so that's basically it. I hope you enjoy the video. Let's hop right into Cubase. Here we are in Cubase looking at my template that I'm currently using for my psytrance production, and I guess you can create something similar depending on what plugins you use, how you like to organize your tracks visually, and this will really speed up your workflow, and it's also going to keep it a lot more organized and consistent because once you type it in and you spell things out properly, or you create all of the correct folders and the correct groupings that you're going to have, and you save it with your template, it's all done. You don't need to worry about you know, typing all these things out every time, loading all of your insert plugins, creating group tracks. So the basic things that I have are folders for visual organization. I've got some group tracks that I can send multiple channels to a group and control either like filtering or some other types of processing on a whole group of tracks. I've then also got some send effects that we'll go through after, and I'll also show you some parts of my master channel or the output section, such as the control room, and how we can use that. So the first things that I've got is a couple folders, and I've organized them with how I like to group my tracks together. Previously I was using, I guess, more specific folder tracks, like I had one for my snares, I had one for my hi-hats, but I noticed myself kind of getting lazy and not really, by the end of the project, having a lot of stuff that I've kind of added towards the bottom in just like the section where I'm working, and then it kind of gets a little messy and I don't really go back in and listen and solo the sounds that I haven't named and throw them in the correct folders. And so it got a little bit chaotic, even though I had a template with folders in it. So I've made them more broad to hold like kick bass percussions and all of my impacts and, like, I guess risers I would put in there too, because those are generally the things that I work with all together. So I would have my kick bass, my percussions, and let's say I would have like a snare roll or a riser or a reverse crash coming up, and I'd want to cut all the percussions for one bar. So for me it makes sense to put all of those things next to each other, and because I had my reverse crashes and whatever, I also kind of want to have my impacts or my risers that will be in the same places in the same folder. Next we have atmospheres pads. So this is kind of just anything to differentiate the two different types of synths or sounds that you're going to have. Then I have one for audio bounces, and then samples, so if you have any voice samples or miscellaneous stuff. With all of these folders, pretty much everything should have a place. And then moving forward, I have some group tracks. So I've organized it by the three main things that I actually put processing on or use filtering on regularly. So if we look at the group channels, they all have a fab filter loaded on them already. And the fab filter just has pretty much a 30 dB high pass and low pass. And the reason that's there and enabled is because I'll use my groups to do filtering on, the kick bass for certain sections. And I don't want to have to not only add an EQ, but then create all of these bands and then the automation lanes. So now if I have this set up, I could just open this, go to the section that I want, I hit right mode, and then I move it, and then if we look, for example, it creates the automation lane right there, and then I can just delete and edit with my pencil, or edit the automation that I drew in, or actually draw it in over time, and you can kind of play it in however you want. So that saves me a lot of time. On my snare group here, I have the same thing, except I also have a saturation, which is just the default Saturn, so that I can open that plugin quickly and start putting some saturation on all of the different snare layers that I might have in the track. Send effects. So send effects allow you to send, or allow you to open one instance of a plugin, and then you can send pretty much any tracks, any combination of tracks to whatever plugins. So this helps you with not opening the same plugin 100 times and consuming a lot of CPU, but also it helps you use plugins, or sorry, use effects with a little bit of a different workflow. So insert effects in Cubase, go on the left side here, and then once you create an effects channel, you have it come up in your effects sends over here on the right hand side, which you just have to select which one you want to send it to. You turn on the power, and the cool thing with send effects is it works with a dry wet signal. And then you have the, if you click on the effects, you actually have the level of the output of the effects. So what do I have as far as send effects? So most simply, I would just have two basic reverbs. So I'm using Valhalla in both of those cases. One of them is long, the other one is short, and it's a different type of algorithm. So it's a chamber, the other one is a hall. And the other three send effects that I have are three different compressors, and I'm using them for parallel compression. The reason I have three different types is because they all have a different sound, and I also might want to control different send levels for different things that I'm adding parallel compression to. So for example, if I parallel compress my kick bass group, I might not want to have the same level of parallel compression on that as I do want on my snare group. So I've set it up, and while instead of just using three copies of the same compressor, I've also set it up with three different compressors. That way I could try it going into a different compressor, see if it sounds different, see if I like the way it sounds more going into one over the other one. So how you set up parallel compression, I'll just show you on maybe the Millennia. So what you want to do is you want to put your ratio max, you want to put your attack time to the minimum setting, and you want to put your release time to the maximum setting. And then you want to put your threshold pretty much all the way down. So you want to like absolutely squash this as much as possible. You should have like full gain reduction on your meters. And yeah, you want the fastest attack and the longest release. So really the only thing that you're going to be getting is like this little bit of attack, and then you're going to be getting all of the rest of the sound super squished and basically no dynamics. So what that's going to do is when you mix that in underneath the original signal, you're going to get a much like tighter sound, because you're mixing in this really compressed stuff, but you still have the full original, which can be dynamic if it was dynamic originally. So it really is a useful technique that a lot of people I think are not using, or is kind of underrated, and they don't realize how powerful parallel or New York style compression can be. Moving on to the next step, we'll open up my mixer here, and we can see I do have plugins on my master output, and a lot of people will tell you not to do that, which I disagree with, as long as you are mixing into those plugins and not just turning them on at the end of a final mix to try and fix things that you weren't perfectly happy with in your mix work. So that is the case where you don't want to just put something on the master channel. If you have something on the master channel early on in the mix stage, or kind of once you've developed like a little rough mix and you're working on moving the mix forward, if you have things on your effect, on your master output, things like a compressor, so I've got it with kind of like a medium attack and really light compression. If it's on your master output, it's got maybe 1 dB, maybe 2 dBs. The meter's just kind of moving, and you're getting a bit of the sound of the compression, and you're mixing into it the whole time. So it's kind of like on an old console when you would have the compressor on, let's say, the SSL console that was built in, the classic bus compressor, that used to be on the output channel of the compressor, and a lot of engineers would leave it on and they would mix into it. So as long as you're pushing and you're feeding tracks into that compressor's threshold, and it's moving, and you're working with that, listening to it that way, when you make every other decision in your mix, then there's absolutely no problem with it. Another thing that I have, is just kind of like a quick mid-side EQ that I cut some of the bass from the side information. Like I said, I'm going to go over this in depth in another video. I'll do another one on this master output channel and how I run my processing chain in the output channel. So control room is a Cubase unique kind of feature to try and emulate some aspects of a real studio. So you can put things like, you can have a talkback mic, you can send headphone mixes to somebody that you were recording, which isn't really useful for electronic music producers, right? But what it is useful for is it gives us an extra set of inserts, which kind of goes in between your interface and your speakers. So it's this chain where you can put some metering plugins, or you can put some speaker correction plugin like SonarWorks. And when you export your stereo out, or you're just doing a bounce from your project, right? You select your stereo output as your source. You can leave SonarWorks on, even though it's got this EQ, and it's not gonna be printed onto the final mix. Whereas in most other softwares, you have to load it in the output channel as the last plugin. And then every time you want to export, you need to make sure that you turn it off, or else you're going to have the sound of that EQ printed on your mix. The main plugins that I have in Control Room are for metering. And this is just because if I want to meter something, I want to meter it after I do any maybe like limiting, or if I do some kind of light bus compression. Anyways, I don't want to take up insert slots also. So I've got Voxengo plugins to do like frequency analysis. So I've got Voxengo Span, it's got a little correlation meter. Then you have Anspec from Voxengo, which is kind of like the DigiCheck from RME that everybody loves, where it's broken down by octave, I believe, or by maybe 1/3 octave. Can't remember exactly. And then I also use the Melda Productions stereoscope, which lets me just see the vector graph. I believe it is this one. So that's pretty much the gist of my template. So you guys should create something similar, or any kind of template that allows you to save time and not have to type in all of these things and nicely label them or color code them. And it's really going to speed up your workflow. And another main thing about that is the type of template that I've created here is nothing on the artistic side, right? So it's really just the framework for how I like to organize my project and title everything and where I like to put things. But I do like to save myself time by having different starting templates like this. Like I have a different one for mastering with the plugins that I typically use for mastering. I have a different one when I do audio work for advertising on radio and stuff like that. And the way you can do that is you just start a blank project. You set it up everything the way that you want. You don't have to save it as a project name yet. You go down into File, you do Save As Template, and then you can create a new name, or you can overwrite an existing one. And then when you open your Cubase the next time and you open up the Steinberg hub, it's going to give you the option to select your own templates page, or previously opened, where you'll be able to find anything that you've worked on recently. So store your templates for your different uses or your different genres of music that you get into producing, and let me know what you guys like to put in your templates, or what plugins you think my template could be missing. And yeah, let me know if you guys want to see anything else in upcoming videos. I'm going to go through my master chain in more detail in a later video. Alright guys, be sure to give me a like and subscribe if you're enjoying these videos. Click the bell for notifications. If you have any questions or comments about this video, or videos you'd like me to do in the future, like I said, just drop them down below and I'll do my best to get to those as soon as possible.